greetings, everybody. It's time to begin the Bible study. We had a few glitches this morning. It's now 11:30 just about. We normally start at 11, but our telephone system hookup isn't recognizing my call sign at this time for some reason, and I can't get a hold of their technical support until Monday, or they're not open today, unfortunately. So we'll have to do without the telephone hookup today, but we will do, God willing, the streaming and make the tape for downloading for people that want to hear it in the future, like maybe tomorrow or this coming week, if you can't get the streaming itself. So today is August the 27th, 2011, and the 26th day of Ob. So it's this coming week will be the month of Elul will begin. The Jews have today is the 27th day of Ob, so they're a day ahead of us because they don't go by the new moon calendar anymore. They go by a fixed calendar, which often is a day early or even a day late, or sometimes it's off 2 days. But God's calendar is based upon the new moon. And when they see the new moon, then they declare the new month. The Hebrew word Kodesh, which means month, also means new moon. It's really very simple. And the Jewish authorities all recognize it. It's written up in their books on the calendar. There's really no reason for us not to understand it and to obey it and to do it the way God says in the Bible. And the Jews apparently, now that they've got this fixed calendar, which they adopted in 357, 358 A.D., 300 years after Christ walked the earth, since they've adopted it, it's become a part of their tradition, and now they have a hard time letting go and getting back to the faith once delivered and the calendar once delivered. They're just not seemingly willing to do that. But that's the sad case with human nature. Human nature is rebellious against God, as we read in Jeremiah 17, verse 9. The human heart is evil above all things and desperately wicked, Jeremiah says. Who can know it? Who can understand it? Who can fathom it? Who can plumb its depths of depravity and rebellion? Human nature is that way because of the influence of Satan the devil, who is the great adversary of God, the architect of confusion and rebellion, the first great rebel and the first great liar, as Christ tells us in John chapter 8. If you want to turn over there, the 8th chapter of the book of John. And the Pharisees, who are in a way following the ways of the devil because of their traditions, and they rejected the commandments of God by interpreting them out of existence by substituting Jewish traditions, rabbinical traditions instead. And Christ came and told them their sins and their faults, and they took great umbrage and offense at his words. As well, who are you? Who taught you? What university did you graduate from? Are you from Harvard or Yale or one of the Ivy schools, so to speak? What seminar or seminary or rabbinical school did you come from? Who taught you? Was it Rabbi Gamaliel? They knew he didn't go to a rabbinical school at all. He was taught by God the Father and the Holy Spirit. So he responded to them because they accused him of having a demon and doing his miracles through demonic influence. And he said to them in John 8:44, I do not have a demon, but I honor my Father, and you dishonor me. And I do not seek my own glory. I'm not in this for myself. There is one who seeks and judges. There is one who seeks and judges. Most assuredly, I say to you, if anyone keeps my word, he will never see death. And then the Jews said to him, well, we know now that you have a demon. Abraham is dead, and the prophets are dead, and you say, if anyone keeps my word, he will never taste death. Are you greater than Abraham? See, they had an attitude. Are you greater than Abraham, who is dead, and the prophets who are dead? What do you make yourself out to be? Who do you claim to be? And Jesus answered and said, if I honor myself, my honor is nothing. It is my Father who honors me, of whom you say that he is your God. Yet you have not known him, but I know him. And if I say I do not know him, I would be a liar like you. But I do know him, and I keep his word. Your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day and my coming. Abraham knew the Messiah would come one day. And he saw it, and he was glad, he rejoiced. And the Jews said to him, you're not even 50 years old. Have you seen Abraham? Who lived, 3,000 years before. And he said to them, most assuredly I say to you, before Abraham was, before he existed, I am. See, he's saying he is the I am, the Yahweh, the Son of God, the proto-man, the Logos of God who existed alongside the Father in heaven before he became a human being. So he says, I am the I am. The second Yahweh. And they took up stones to stone and throw at him. But Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple, and going through the midst of them, their eyes were blinded, and he passed by. And he also said to them in verse 44, to these Jews that were condemning him and trying to kill him, he said, you are of your father the devil, and the desires of your father you want to do. He was a murderer from the beginning, and does not stand in the truth, because there is no truth in him.
It's aborted. It will not come.
Did you do the router? So he says, he is a murderer from the beginning, and does not stand in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own resources, for he is a liar and the father of lies. But because I tell you the truth, you won't believe me. Which of you convicts me of sin? Which of you can point the finger at me and say, look, you've sinned? No one could. And if I tell you the truth, why don't you believe me? Why don't you believe the truth? He who is of God hears God's words. Therefore you do not hear, because you are not of God. But they claim to be of God. They claim to be his ministers, his servants, his rabbis, his teachers. They claim to be the leaders of his church. They were the rabbis. They were of the school of Hillel and Shammai. They were the ones who taught the Torah. But they mistaught the Torah. They went astray. And by the time of Christ, they were buried in their traditions to where they denied the laws of God. They were not converted, but they were a religious institution dominant in ancient Judea, just like the churches today have denied the word of God and gone astray, all lock, stock, and barrel of them, and they're teaching fantasy and falsehood and fables, and not the word of God, not the truth. So they're not of God. Who are they of? Well, they're of the liar. They're the sons of the liar. And who's the liar? Satan the devil. He has his churches, and he has his ministers. He deceives men in the ministry. And once he deceives them, they pretty well stay deceived. unless God intervenes. But if their minds are open for deception, and that's the way the world is today, the world is full of deception. And Christ prophesied it in Matthew chapter 24. In the days before his coming, he said to his disciples in verse 24, for false Christs and false prophets will rise up and show great signs and wonders, and deceive, if possible, even the elect, even the true servants of God might be led astray if they're not watchful and very careful and vigilant. And he says in verse 11, then there will be many false prophets who will rise up and deceive many. And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. Wax cold, the King James says. And that is a condition of the world around us today. But it's important, brethren, that we are very careful to put God's word first and study the scriptures and obey him. And do what he says. So we'll continue on with the Bible study with the taped message. And
The only thing I haven't done is we take the computer totally down and bring it back up.
well, we're having problems with the streaming, but we'll just forget about that today and find out what we can this coming week. As you know from last week, we had a problem with our internet service provider. They went out of business, and we didn't know about it, and so we tried to get on the internet last week, and it all failed. But we switched providers last week to another company, and now we're able to get back on the internet, and everything's working fine, except now we can't stream, apparently, and I'll have to talk to them about that. We may have to buy a new router. That's what the man said could be the problem. So we'll see about that. First I want to give you some good news. This is from Nick Wood in England. Dear friends and brethren, he says, it seems that Ron McCartney is making a miraculous recovery. Not least thanks to all the many prayers you've all been offering up on his behalf. And below is a copy of the latest update from Ron's son, Dwayne McCartney, which is very encouraging. It says, hi Nick and Barbara, my dad appears to have come leaps and bounds in the last 24 hours. Gail and I are just back from visiting him. He was moved this afternoon to a rehabilitation unit, where the evening he was sitting up in bed laughing and joking with us. Still has paralysis on the left side, but is aware that it is now a case of reteaching the brain and appears to accept that. Appreciates and thanks you for all your kind card and thoughts and prayers from all, as do Gail and I. What an emotional roller coaster the last 6 days have been. So that's the update on Ron McCartney in Ireland. No, Scotland. I never can remember for sure. I believe they're in Ireland. Kathy says Scotland, so what do I know? He says, please continue praying for Ron as well as all those who are sick and unwell. I know Ron and his family really appreciate all your prayers over the last few days, so on their behalf, I say thank you all very much. Bye for now, take care, and may our great God guide you always. So that's good news. Now I have some breaking news to report. President Obama has just confirmed that the D.C. earthquake, they call it, that just hit the East Coast, occurred on a rare and obscure fault line, apparently known as Bush's fault. Obama also announced that the Secret Service and Maxine Waters continue an investigation of the earthquake's suspicious ties to the Tea Party. Interesting. Conservatives, however, have proven, and conservatives, of course, have proven that the earthquake was caused by the Founding Fathers rolling over in their graves. That's all breaking news.
Yeah, for sure.
Makes you want to break out and laugh. All right. Okay. There's
There's not much else to go laugh or something like that.
yeah, when you can't either laugh or cry or weep or laugh, you might as well
Just
see
laugh.
the funny side
Yeah.
and laugh if you can. Some things are certainly laughable. This is a poem, which is a very interesting little poem. It's about hypocrisy versus life. It's the words of Christ, or the words of God to his people. And it says, you call me master and obey me not. You call me light and see me not. You call me the way and walk not. You call me life and desire me not. You call me wise and follow me not. You call me fair and love me not. You call me rich and ask me not. You call me eternal and seek me not. You call me gracious and trust me not. You call me mighty and honor me not. You call me just and fear me not. If I condemn you, blame me not.
Very well.
The author of that is unknown, but it certainly hits home the truth. Like I said, human nature is desperately wicked and deceitful above all things, as Jeremiah said. And certainly I think that poem illustrates that fact. Okay. Then I have another message here from Flash Traffic, which is by Joel Rosenberg. And he says, Washington, D.C., August 23. 2 rare earthquakes have hit the U.S. in 2 days. A 5.9 magnitude tremor, epicentered in southern Virginia, shook the White House, the Capitol, and the Pentagon, and all up and down 1,000 miles of the East Coast. It was felt up and down the eastern seaboard, and the largest earthquake in Colorado and in New Mexico for decades has occurred on Monday. Until now, Joel says, I'd never experienced an earthquake before. While the one here in Washington, D.C. was relatively mild compared to the one in December in Japan, for example, compared to the one in Japan, it made me think of the column I wrote last month entitled, The Lord is Shaking the Nations, Physically, Spiritually, and Financially. Americans, too, are being shaken. We face arguably the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. Nearly half of all Americans believe we are headed towards another greater depression. Unemployment's over 9%. Housing foreclosures are sky high. People have lost enormous sums of money due to depressed housing prices and stock market volatility. The federal government's trying to spend our way to prosperity, but is making things worse. Our annual federal budget deficit topped $1.3 trillion last year. This year looks like the feds will spend more than $1.5 trillion beyond what they have. It's getting worse. We're going to spend ourselves to prosperity. Like I said last week, it's funny money. It's like monopoly money. It's becoming valueless. It will only be of value as long as our creditors accept it like China and Japan. China's getting to the point, they're saying, look, we're not going to buy any more of your debt. We may have to sell off states and cities. Or they'll just come in and try to take them, payment for the debt. And maybe I'll just give them California. It's such a mess anyway. That's a joke, of course. But anyway, our people now are worthy of enslavement because the people are going along with this farce, this travesty, this economic roller coaster of ill will and deception. So many people just want to have a good time, you know, and eat, drink, and be merry, they say, for tomorrow we die. Well, they may die today, or maybe sooner than they expect, when the piper comes calling for repayment. Well, there seems to be a sign in the heavens coming this fall during the Feast of Tabernacles. So it's something we need to keep our eyes on and watch, because Comet Elenin is headed our way. And they're saying it's a pretty good sized comet, and it's going to come closest to the Earth. Well, let's see. It says this comet Elenin is racing toward our planet, the Earth. It's not an asteroid. It's not on a crash course, but it is expected to be at its closest point to us, about 21 million miles, during the culmination of God's annual holy days, the Feast of Tabernacles. This has sparked a wave of speculation that it could be some sort of miraculous sign or warning from God in the heavens, perhaps heralding the long anticipated return of Christ, or perhaps heralding the beginning of the Great Tribulation. There could be a lot of possibilities there. It's on its way, says one gospel preacher in Indiana, and says right now it's in the middle, it's on its way and right in the middle of the Feast of Trumpets. It's going to come through and get in between Earth and the Sun. The comet's nearest point to Earth takes place October 16, which is the third day of the Feast of Tabernacles. That's according to the Jewish calendar. So it's going to be getting nearest to the Earth right during the Feast of Tabernacles, which we will be celebrating October 14 through 21 this year. Now another article about the Middle East and the rising up of Turkey and the new, I guess you might call it the new Ottoman Empire, or the Muslim Empire, because Turkey wants to bring the Muslim nations together, the Sunni nations, in a world caliphate. That's all the nations of the world that practice the Sunni Muslim religion gathered together into one empire, one block of nations. The article says for millions of people around the world, the most consequential year of the 1900s was 1924. That was when the last caliph, Islam's supreme spiritual and political leader, the heir of the Prophet Muhammad, was deposed from power in Turkey. After a 1,400-year institution of the caliphate was abolished, and all members of the Ottoman dynasty were sent into exile. That was 1924, after World War I. After the British conquered most of the lands of Turkey in the Middle East, including Israel and Jerusalem and Judea, all the way from Egypt to Israel. And the Ottoman Empire fell, so the entire Middle East fell, to the British and the French. Then they carved it up and created today's nations there after World War I, including Jordan and Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and Iraq, and all those nations were created after World War I by the British and the French with the approval of the United States. And they promised a little strip of land to the Jews for the reconstitution of the land of Israel. And that was given, they were given permission to return to the Middle East, to Jerusalem and Israel in 1917, following the end of World War I. That was called the Balfour Declaration. It was made in 1917. There's a lot behind that story, which very interesting. But the Jews began migrating back to Israel then, given the land to live on by the victors of World War I. And then after World War II, in 1948, Israel was allowed to become a nation, recognized by the United Nations. And they declared their independence on, I think, May 14, 1948. Well, so meanwhile, Turkey then languished, and the Ottoman Empire had perished, and it was considered by all the Arabs and the Muslims to be a great wound, a serious, fatal wound. But now, let's see, Turkey was taken over by a man by the name of Ataturk, who was the only undefeated general left of the Ottoman Empire. Nevertheless, he went on to reject the Ottoman imperialism and colonialism, which could be called Muslim imperialism and colonialism. So Turkey's been tending toward the West, alliance with NATO, and is a member of NATO now ever since that time. But now Turkey's reverting back to its ancient history. And as of the 2002, under the Justice and Development Party in Turkey, Ataturk's legacy is being dismantled brick by brick, and they're returning to their old ways. Turkey has been growing less Western, less secular, less democratic, and not just casting ballots and guaranteeing freedoms and minority rights, but they're rejecting the ways of the West. The AKP party's been positioning Turkey as a contender for leadership in the Muslim world, making it an ally and a rival of Arabs and Persians eager for the same role. At midnight on March 4, 1924, the last caliph left the Catalca railway station in a special coach attached to the Orient Express. Abdul Mejid II may indeed have been the last caliph of the 20th century, but there are those now fighting to revive the age of Muslim conquerors and conquests, power and glory. To me, that is talking about the rising up of the Muslim empire, which the Bible calls the King of the South in the book of Daniel. The King of the South now is beginning to be cobbled together, with Egypt being overthrown, with Libya being overthrown, and Gaddafi now in hiding, and Tunisia already having been overthrown, and democracy apparently being replaced by an Islamic rulership. The people are fervent worshippers of Islam in Egypt and Libya and Tunisia. The Muslim Brotherhood may well come out triumphant and together with Turkey and the Arab nations of the Middle East will cobble together the new caliphate of the Muslim religion. And apparently there will be agreement in the West, and NATO and the Western states will agree to this new revolution in the Middle East because we will consider them as allies and friends, thinking that we can influence them to stay with us against the East and the Russians and the Chinese. But the alliance will not last very long. According to Revelation chapter 13, the beast will sit in power for 3.5 years, and then it'll all come unraveled. And there will be war between the king of the north, Europe and America, against the king of the south, the Muslim nations, in Daniel chapter 11. And that'll be followed by war between the west and the east, the kings of the north and the east, Russia and China, and perhaps even India, and certainly Persia. Signs of the times are evident in what's happening in France. France is descended from the biblical tribe of Reuben. Reuben was the man who went up to his father's concubine and had intercourse with Jacob's wife or concubine, and he almost lost his life because of it, because God was very upset and angry at Reuben. He was a shame to all of his brothers because of his sexual appetite and weakness. Reuben was the firstborn son of Leah, which was Jacob's first wife. And he didn't like it when Jacob later also married Rachel, then also married the handmaiden of Leah and Rachel. So he had 4 wives. And Reuben felt his mother was being betrayed and slighted and ignored, and so out of a spirit of, you might say, vengeance and anger, he went in and slept with his father's handmaid, one of his wives, one of the handmaids. As a result, the testament of Reuben shows, in the testament of the patriarchs, that Reuben became deathly sick unto death, and only by a miracle of God's forgiveness and the prayers of his father Jacob and his mother Leah and all the family and the brothers, because of their prayers, God intervened and spared Reuben, and he became one of the mighty, powerful tribes of Israel. And today Reuben is primarily the nation of France in Europe. And France, like Reuben, is famous for being unstable in her ways. Unstable as water. Prophecy calls France, or Reuben, in the book of Genesis chapter 49. The French are intellectually superior to many people, but they lack the stability of strong, persevering character. They're bright, but they're not consistent. They're kind of flaky or mercurial. They needed us to rescue them in World War I from the Kaiser, and in World War II from Adolf Hitler. If it wasn't for Britain and America, France would have been overrun by the German steamroller in both wars. And now they repay us by being untrustworthy allies. Well, the article shows how unstable Reuben is, or France is today. It says, Islam overtaking Catholicism in France. France is still mainly a Catholic nation, but Islam is fast growing in France. Islamic mosques, it says, are being built more often in France than Roman Catholic churches. And there are more practicing Muslims in the country of France than there are practicing Catholics. Nearly 150 new mosques currently are under construction in France, home to the biggest Muslim community in all of Europe. The mosque building projects are at various levels of completion. The total number of mosques in France has already doubled to more than 2,000 mosques just during the last 10 years. By contrast, the Roman Catholic Church in France has built only 20 new churches compared to 2,000 during the last 10 years, and has formally closed more than 60 other churches, Catholic churches which have closed their doors in France, many of which are destined to become mosques. Imagine that. Although 64% of the French population, or 41 million, out of France's 65 million population, identify themselves as Roman Catholic, but only 4% of those actually are practicing Catholics. By comparison, 75% of the 4.5 million Muslims, 75% or 4.5 million Muslims of the estimated 6 million Muslims in France identify themselves as believers or as Muslim believers, and 41% say they are practicing Muslims, according to an in-depth research report on Islam in France. As their numbers grow, Muslims in France are becoming far more assertive than ever before, far more belligerent in seeking their political gains. They want to create a Sharia law state in France. That's their ambition even in America. We're having mosques built all over America today. And even the governor of one state is a practicing Muslim. He was sworn in with his hand over the Quran, or on the Quran, instead of the Bible. Our country has become a, well, what do you call it? A refuge disposal for the world's terrorists. And those of every word religion you can imagine. Here's another little article in the headlines today from the Blaze. Food stamps create jobs, says the Obama administration. You might say, what? Food stamps create jobs? People are going out getting on food stamps and that's creating jobs? Well, somebody has to give them the food stamps, right? I guess. Somebody has to run the program so you get a few jobs. Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack told MSNBC on Tuesday that food stamps actually are creating jobs. That's what he said. Obama's Secretary of Agriculture. Well, we all know better than that. That's just the food stamps, the vast increase in food stamp users in this country, now I think about 45 million, shows the terrible economic conditions our country is in. And I'm not saying it's wrong to use food stamps. It's all right to take advantage of whatever programs there are out there for people today, because our country is in very bad shape economically. We've been exporting jobs overseas to India and China, and business overseas, and manufacturing plants overseas, and major corporations have been investing billions of dollars overseas, sending the jobs over there because those people will work for a lot less money than American workers, and so they can produce more cheaply all the products that they produce over there and ship them back here still cheaper than making them in America. But the problem with that is we won't even be able to afford to buy them at the way things are going. We have to have income jobs in order to buy these products from overseas. If we're shipping all the jobs over there, then we're going to be thrown out of work, which is what's happening now. The unemployment's sky high in this country and getting worse. So how are we going to buy anything? People are now, a lot of people are living on the street. They're living in the back seat of their automobile, or in shelters, or in alleyways. And, of course, Obama vaunts and parades and boasts about his tremendous stimulus program, borrowing $1.2 trillion from thin air and then investing it in the stimulus program to stimulate the banks, to give them money to loan, and corporations, so they can hire workers to produce. But if there's no demand, they won't hire the workers. Why produce if there's no buyers able to buy? But they boast about the stimulus program, and guess what? Here's an example of the stimulus program at work. Your tax dollars, so to speak, at work. $20 million in stimulus funds has created the amazing number of 14 jobs. Why not just take the $20 million and give it to 14 people? And then at least they'd each have over $1 million apiece, right? $1.5 million apiece. Then they wouldn't even have to work. They could invest it, and but no, they spent $20 million in the city of Seattle for green jobs from a federal government program. This was on Earth Day in the year 2010. Now, a year later, they've used that money to create a stunning 14 jobs. 14 jobs for $20 million. That's the government at work. Meanwhile, Louis Farrakhan, who is a Muslim black preacher, the head of the Muslims in America, the Nation of Islam, they call it, spoke recently in New York City's Harlem. And in this short clip, he makes the outrageous claim that the real terrorists in the world today are American soldiers. And he's getting away with saying things like that. But there is a man who's written a book called Obama, the Obama Error, and he says there's very good evidence that it's a little bit unproven, but there's good evidence that the real birth father of Barack Hussein Obama is not his legal father. Of course, not the Indonesian Muslim who adopted him, and then he also had a legal father, Barry Soetoro, who allegedly married Ann Durham, his mother, who was white. Allegedly, it happened in Hawaii, but this man's research has revealed that Ann Durham, as a young teenager of about 17 or 19 years of age, getting out of high school, had already become a practicing communist and Muslim, and was heard that Fidel Castro was coming to visit the country and give a speech at the United Nations in New York City. And it was all being organized by none other than Louis Farrakhan, the leader of the black Muslims. So she went back there as an impressionable teenager, and this is what the theory suggests, because she was a devoted, avowed communist. What greater thing to do than meet Fidel Castro, and hear him at the UN, and get acquainted with those who brought him over, like Malcolm X, or Louis Farrakhan, I should say. I get those two a little confused. They're both X's, in my opinion. But in met Louis Farrakhan, and then presto changeo, she comes back to Seattle and goes down over to Hawaii and she's pregnant. And she gives birth to a baby boy. So the question is, who is the real father of Barack Hussein Obama? Is it his natural father, or his birth father, or his adopted father? There's three possibilities. So that's a question I think he was born in Kenya myself, as his grandmother says, and they got family there in Kenya. And it's interesting, after Obama became president, he sent, I think it was like $20 million to Kenya as a payment to support his cousin's run for the presidency of that country, who was a terrible racist. He also sent about $20 million, or maybe it was $2 million, I'm not sure. But he also sent $20 million to the Muslims in Palestine, in the Gaza Strip, to the Hamas, and those in Hamas, because of their help in getting him elected. And there was payback to them, $20 million for their help in getting him elected. It's a strange, strange world we're living in today. Now, another source of news in the past few weeks has been the fact that the another item in the news that we all should have taken notice of was that the U.S. Congress has created within itself a new Super Congress Committee, which is supposed to take charge of business and all budgetary matters. So they're taking the budget out of the hands of the House of Representatives and the Congress and giving it to this super committee. Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid and President Obama have now taken full control on Capitol Hill. A small group of 13 will rule America. 13 out of Congress, specially chosen and approved by both parties. In other words, the U.S. Constitution has been overridden and set aside. The U.S. is no longer governed by a majority vote of the people and their representatives in Congress. The American elite have decided, the elite, both Republicans and Democrats, have decided to create a super congressional committee who will decide how the American government shall be ruled, what kind of budget cuts will be enforced, and how the government shall be able to increase its revenues. Yeah. By borrowing until they're broke, borrowing themselves into the poorhouse, by taxation until you tax the taxpayer to death. Then, of course, you have no revenue. Everything comes full cycle, and you end up with total unemployment and collapse. This new committee will be made up of equal parts Republicans and Democratic lawmakers, and will take a broad look at the most serious problems in government spending in order to determine what the second round of cuts would really encompass. The committee would have authority to raise taxes or revenues and enact tax reform. So even while we're going down the slippery slope, they're still planning on raising taxes on what they call the rich. So the consequence of this is that the globalists have won another victory. The U.S. shall no longer be run by its constitutional laws. They give the people the power to elect the politicians who shall rule over them. Today, the Republican majority in the House of Representatives have become impotent and powerless. The U.S. politicians have internally selected a small group in their midst who will decide the national financial policies. To be able to set aside the American Constitution, the ruling politicians just had to create enough fiscal chaos so that no workable solution could be found between the squabbling parties. And so in the middle of chaos, they decided there had to be a smaller group to make the decisions. Well, that's how dictatorships are governed and managed. So the people's representatives no longer have any say in the process. It's a select group that makes the decisions, that report to Obama. For President Obama, he says this is the ideal solution. A small group of 6 positive Democrats and 6 friendly Republicans are much easier to manipulate than a Republican majority in the House of Representatives. The totalitarian regime in ancient Rome was governed in a similar way. The emperor chose to have a small circle of yes-men around himself. The emperor gave the people bread and circuses. Today we might say food stamps and football. And very few raised any objections. Just pass out the food stamps and pass out the beer and let's watch football on TV. Those with a little more money can go watch the game and riot in the stadium. So the debt crisis in the United States has resulted in a bloodless state coup. Soon the world government, the one world government, will emerge. And we'll see the results in the headlines and in our pocketbooks and in the police force and all around us when that happens. It's not very far away. One man who sees what's happening today in America is the commentator Rush Limbaugh. Now, some say he's a radical, and some say he's just a noisy blabbermouth. But the truth is, Rush Limbaugh is a conservative Republican, or at least a conservative speaker and radio talk host who knows what's happening. And he says today what we have happening in America is what's called Obamageddon. Obamageddon. Since the lowering of America's credit rating internationally from AAA to AA+, that's the first lowering of our credit rating in history. And it happened under Obama's watch. So Rush Limbaugh says this is Obamageddon at work. Barackalypse now. Barackalypse now. Remember the movie Apocalypse Now about the Vietnam War? Well, this is Barackalypse now. The only silver lining, he says, in this whole thing is that in 2007, Obama is a dead man walking. In other words, how can he get reelected? 2012. What did I say?
2007.
Yeah, I did say 2007, didn't I? I don't know why, it just popped out. It's 2012, of course. Obama's a dead man walking, he says. Anyone want to tell me he's not landslidable now? Well, I think in this sense, Rush Limbaugh is breathing the wrong kind of smoke. You know, Obama's got a war chest for campaigning of over $1 billion. And he's always out there campaigning now, and he's always pointing the finger at his enemies, the Republicans, and those nasty Tea Partiers, and most of the public are buying it. And then he says our economic problems are Bush's fault. Just like the earthquake. The Bush fault line erupted. Oh, blame Bush, and Bush was not the smartest or the wisest president we've had. But I think he was honorable in the sense he tried to fight the terrorists in Iraq and Afghanistan. And while he was doing it, he was successful. Now, under Obama, we're ready to pull out of Afghanistan. And leave it to the Muslims. And we've already basically lowered the war in Iraq, and we're just keeping America a big base there near Babylon, or near in Iraq, to maintain the status quo in the country for as long as we can. But Rush Limbaugh attacked the Democrats and Obama, saying that he's engineering and overseeing the decline of the American Republic. And he's playing the blame game against Republicans about the financial crisis. He's always running around complaining and whining and moaning about all that he inherited from George W. Bush. Well, Rush Limbaugh says he also inherited a AAA credit rating and an employment rate of 5.7%. Now the rating's been decreased under Obama, and the unemployment shot up to 9.1 or 9.2%. Some experts fear that 50% unemployment's in the making, and a 90% stock market crash, and 100% inflation on the horizon. It's a new book out called Aftershock discusses those possibilities, that we haven't seen anything yet. We're just at the beginning of the fiscal hurricane, like the hurricane now bombarding the beaches of North and South Carolina. Which is going to march up through Virginia and Washington, D.C. and Philadelphia and hit New York and Boston in the next few days. This is probably going to be one of the most catastrophic hurricanes in history. It's bigger than Katrina.
It's down to 1.
Well, the size of this hurricane is bigger than Katrina, but the winds blowing is down to about Hurricane 1. They're about 80 to 100 miles an hour. But I'm talking about the size. It's huge. It's bigger than Katrina. Katrina hit all the way from the Gulf Coast and New Orleans all the way through to Mississippi, up to Alabama. This is hitting North and South Carolina and Virginia and going to march all the way up through the New England states. It's huge. So why is this hurricane happening now? Is this a sign from God? I mean, where's it going to go? The White House? Where's it going to go? New York City, modern Babylon the Great, financial capital of the world? Very, very dangerous situation. Let me see if I can find another book out now. It's called, by Mark Stein, After America. Get Ready for Armageddon. Just released. This book, he says, may have you chuckling despite yourself. In this case, over our own nation's demise. This book picks up after his first book on America Alone, where he zeroes in on fault lines of Western cultures, from which America is not exempt. these fault lines of cultural dynamics and infighting between the classes and the races in America. And after America, the new book, Prepare for Armageddon, shows that what happened in Greece already with riots in the streets is going to happen in our country. What happened in Detroit with the destruction of that city is going to happen in the rest of the U.S. after the coming election. That we just haven't seen anything yet. Now, the next thing I want to mention is kind of a joke about the competency of our leadership. Now, we've all lived out west for many years. We've driven the highways and the byways, and you know what a cattle guard is, right? You know what a cattle guard is? You know, you go down the highway and then you cross these metal bars that go across the road. You say, why are those metal bars there? Well, they're there because cattle won't cross over those metal bars. They're afraid they'll get their hooves stuck between the metal bars. So it keeps the cattle from crossing. They're called cattle guards. Well, for those of you who've never traveled to the west or southwest, cattle guards are horizontal steel rails placed at fence openings in dugout places in the roads adjacent to the highways, sometimes across highways, to prevent cattle from crossing over that area. For some reason, the cattle will not cross or step on the guards, probably because they fear getting their hooves or feet caught between the rails. But they just won't do it. A few months ago, President Obama received and was reading a report that there were over 100,000 cattle guards in Colorado. The Colorado ranchers had protested his proposed changes in grazing policies. So he ordered the Secretary of the Interior to fire half of the cattle guards immediately. Before the Secretary of the Interior could respond and presumably try to straighten the President out over the matter, Vice President Joe Biden intervened with a request that before any cattle guards were fired, they be given 6 months of retraining to become Arizona border guards. Times are hard, said Joe Biden. It's only fair for the cattle guards and their families to be retrained. And these two guys are running our country. Says, God bless America. Well, you wonder if he's not. The joke is interesting. It's a funny joke, but I'd call it more of a God is cursing America because of our mounting national sins. This next article is 10 signs that economic riots and civil unrest in America are more likely now than ever before. The article says you should let the video footage of the wild violence that you just saw in London, England, burn into your memory, because the same things are going to be happening all over the United States as the economy continues to crumble. If you're under 30 in America today, the situation looks really bleak. And a recent McDonald's held a National Hiring Day. 1 million Americans applied for jobs. Only 6.2% were hired. In the old days, you could walk down to McDonald's and get a job whenever you wanted to. But now, any job is precious. The frustration among young people is palpable. Most of them feel entitled to the American dream, and they feel like the system has failed them. Unfortunately, many of them are already turning to violence. But the economic riots and the civil unrest that we have already seen are nothing compared to what is coming down the pike or down the train track. So far, it's like nothing compared to what the future holds. 10 things happening in America we need to be aware of. Number 1, going to the state fair used to be a fun thing to do, but now no place is safe. A flash mob attack took place recently at a Wisconsin state fair. Flash mobs are where people just get together like in a flash and go on a rampage. That's becoming more common in America. This was Milwaukee police were called out to control the young people. One eyewitness said the flash mob attacks at the Wisconsin State Fair absolutely overwhelmed the limited police presence that was there. 2, the new Rasmussen survey, 48% of Americans believe that reductions in government spending are at least somewhat likely to result in civil unrest inside the country. Point number 3, U.S. consumer confidence in our country's future is now at its lowest level in 30 years, since the days of Jimmy Carter. Number 4, joblessness among young Americans is at an epidemic level. And when rioting does break out, it's usually young people leading the way. In an article in the Atlantic Monthly said 1 in 5 Americans are between 15 and 29 years of age. 1 in 5 of those are unemployed. For minorities and the undereducated, the picture is worse. Black teenagers have an unemployment rate of 44%, twice the rate for white teenagers. Well, that's going to lead to a lot of unrest, isn't it? Number 5, we're starting to see mindless violence in a lot of areas that used to be considered safe. In Kansas City on Saturday night, 3 young people were hit by bullets as they walked the streets of the Country Club Plaza. The mayor of the city was only 50 yards away when the gunfire erupted. Kansas City is now thinking about a strict curfew. Number 6, flash mobs have become such a problem in Philadelphia that the mayor has imposed a strict curfew on young people. Now all teens of between the ages of 13 and 18 must be indoors by 9 o'clock at night. The mayor says the teens need to start pulling up their pants also.
That's a good one,
Yeah, I mean, that's so disrespectful to walk around with your pants hanging halfway down. Number 7, all over the United States we're seeing many struggling Americans would do just anything for money. And for example, in Detroit recently, 3 masked men crashed a vehicle through the entrance of a gas station and took off with an entire ATM machine. Number 8. That's number 8. Desperate people do desperate things. Many of Americans have gotten poorer trying to survive any way they can. For instance, a group of vagrants recently set up a makeshift camp near Prospect Park Lake in Brooklyn. According to the New York Post, many nearby residents have been disturbed by what these drifters are doing to survive. They illegally trap and cook up critters they call the park home, including squirrels, ducks, and swan-like cygnets. Also, they use crude tactics to capture their prey. They use barbed fishing hooks that ripped off the top half of one poor gosling's beak. They then cooked the meat over illegal fires. Some of the animals were eaten raw. Number 9. According to CNN, sales of safes and vaults are soaring right now. One store owner told CNN she believes she is selling a lot more safes now because people are scared of the civil unrest that's coming. People are worried about the decreasing value of the dollar. Burglaries are on the rise in their neighborhoods, and even the possibility that the unrest we are seeing in other parts of the world slipping over into our country. And we got the agitators over here to foment it. Communists and Muslims and all these gangs in Los Angeles and the big cities. They're just waiting for a spark to light the tinder. Number 10. Over the past 100 years, the American population has moved steadily into our big cities. This has created virtual ghost towns in our rural areas from coast to coast. Back in 1910, 72% of Americans lived in rural areas. Today, only 16% live in rural areas. But when you crowd huge numbers of people close together in big cities, that makes riots and civil unrest much more likely. And when the times get rough and when there's no food available or a shortage of food occurs and prices go sky high, these cities are going to become tinder boxes. They're going to be set on fire. Violence will escalate to unimaginable proportions in big cities. And the police forces are being cut back because of economic tight straits. And the firemen are being cut back. So who's going to control these cities when the violence breaks out and the fires erupt? We'll see not the greening of America, but the reddening of America as it goes up in flames. Bible prophecy talks about that. So in conclusion, the article says most Americans are already fed up. The economy is not even that bad yet. A recent survey found 73% of Americans believe the nation is on the wrong track. Another poll found only 17% now believe that the U.S. has the consent of the governed, that the government has the consent of the people. Only 17%. But 73% say we're on the wrong track. And Obama goes on these expensive vacations up to Martha's Vineyard and the New England coast and plays golf while Rome burns, just like ancient Nero of Rome. Only he fiddled when Rome burned. Obama fishes and plays golf. We have a president today who's wearing a mask, who is deceptive from morning till night, a president who is taking us where we don't want to go, has to lie about where he's taking us. Where have all America's statesmen gone? Why do politicians lie? How do you know when a politician is lying? You see his mouth move. It's pretty much 100%. Especially some politicians. You think they lie about 200%. Even when the mouth doesn't move, they lie by their bodily gestures and expressions on their face. This article says, mindless violence accomplishes absolutely nothing positive. It just makes things worse. Instead of coming together and trying to do something productive, many Americans are going to resort to rioting, looting, and civil unrest. We already saw that when Hurricane Katrina hit. We may see it again after this present Hurricane Irene waddles its way up the East Coast and hits Washington and New York and Philadelphia. You see all the scum come out on the streets to have a party and to loot and smash and riot to take what's theirs, what they want to claim is theirs. He says a thin veneer of civilization that we all take for granted is starting to disappear. Hatred and anger are growing by the day. The United States is becoming a very frightening place. And so is the rest of the world. How would you like to live in Libya right now? Excuse me. How would you like to live in Syria or Afghanistan or Iraq or France with a Muslim population ready to explode? There's no place on earth that's safe today. The only place of safety is in the hands of God, as we read in Psalm 91. They may be 10,000 die at your left hand and 1,000 at your right hand. God says, but I will protect you. You who love me and you who obey me and who call upon me. So the writer says, so get ready. And I echo that, brethren. It's time to get ready. Our politicians certainly don't have any answers for us. The debt ceiling deal was a complete and total joke. Corruption is absolutely rampant in Washington, D.C. Barack Obama is getting ready. Well, he just had another vacation. And most of our politicians are only focused on the next election, how to get reelected. So don't expect a miracle to come to the rescue from those who are leading us. They don't care about you. You need to take care of yourself and your family and your friends. The massive economic collapse is coming, and most Americans are going to be totally blindsided by it. That's why we're getting ready here in OMAC. Little by little, we're trying to get ready to prepare for this coming collapse, time of dangerous terrors. We're trying to get ready to plant gardens, can food, and be ready when the supermarkets go out of business. We may even get our own chickens and some goats and some cattle, because we got some land back there which we could put to good use. All we need is a little help. So, why is God bringing all this down on us at this time? Why are we facing the American Armageddon, Obama Armageddon, the Barackalypse in America? I think the answer is partly in the fact that we have a nation with a leadership that's endorsing the homosexual agenda. With Barack Obama in the presidency, we now have a national homosexual day. It used to be the day for weddings in June. June used to be the month for weddings. Now it's the month for the homosexuals. Not only that, but now we have people out there from top universities who are holding meetings in order to reclassify pedophilia, which is man, boy, man, little girl sex. Pedophilia, they want to say, is just another normal sexual lifestyle. And these are educators, prime movers and shakers in our country. It says researchers from several prominent U.S. universities participated in a conference reportedly aiming to normalize pedophilia and call it normal. A group of pro-pedophile activists and mental health professionals are behind this conference. Okay. The article itself says researchers from several prominent U.S. universities are participating in a Baltimore conference reportedly aiming to normalize pedophilia. According to the sponsoring organization's website, the event will examine ways in which minor attracted persons can be involved in a revision of the American Psychological Association's classification of pedophilia. That's what they did with gay sex. They got the American Psychological Association years ago, decades ago, to reverse its claim and its law, its rule that gay sex was criminal and immoral. Then they said it's okay, it's just a change of lifestyle. Now they're going to try the same thing with pedophilia. The conference includes panelists from Harvard University, Johns Hopkins University, the University of Louisville, and the University of Illinois. They claim that the American Psychological Association's treatment of minor attracted individuals, that is those who are attracted to minors, as being inaccurate and misleading. That's the terminology they're using. It's not accurate, not misleading. They classify pedophilia as simply another sexual orientation and decries the stigma attached to it. So they're going to take advantage of and rape little children and say it's all right. It's just another choice. Just another choice. You shouldn't feel bad about it, according to them. And the homosexual lobby now is also pressuring Sesame Street. Ever see the program Sesame Street on television? Well, now they want Sesame Street to change and portray a homosexual puppet marriage. That's right. The homosexual lobby demands that Bert and Bernie get married. And then, of course, they'll be showing this all of our kids as if it's normal. These radicals also demand a transgender character to be added to the show in a tasteful way. Transgender meaning both male and female, I guess. A person that can go both ways. Seems ridiculous to me. When it comes to the innocence of our children, enforcing their homosexual lifestyle into every aspect of our lives. There's no way we should allow that to happen. The bottom line is the homosexual lobby wants desperately to mainstream homosexual behavior as natural and wholesome. And they won't stop at using our children as targets to achieve their agenda. Why do we tolerate this, the writer says, when homosexuals are less than 2% of our U.S. population? Why do we let them dictate our culture? Is it because we have a homosexual president and a largely homosexual Congress? And now our president's assistants throughout the government, he's appointed homosexuals to high office? America has now convinced the United Nations to endorse gay rights for the first time, to endorse the homosexual so-called rights in the UN. The United Nations endorsed the rights of gay, lesbian, and transgender people for the first time ever, passing a resolution hailed as historic by the U.S. and other backers, but it was decried by African and Islamic countries. This is a place where Obama splits with his Muslim religion and his Muslim influence, because he's for the gay agenda. The Muslims as a whole are against it. In an article by Noah W. Hutchings in a recent Prophetic Observer, August 2011, he has a great article entitled Obama's Plan to Sodomize America. And there's a picture right on the front cover of the White House being hit by a lightning bolt.
Yeah.
That occurred this year on Easter Sunday. You wonder if there wasn't a message in that. The White House being attacked or struck by lightning on Easter Sunday 2011. And Noah Hutchings writes, one of the first official acts of Barack Obama upon becoming president was to issue a proclamation designating June to be the traditional month of brides to be LGBT month, which stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender month. According to Obama, this was done to honor this minority segment of the population, which he says is really 1.7%, as this nation's most important citizens. The full text of the proclamation was carried in the June 27, 2009 edition of the San Francisco Pride. Now I want to go on in this article. Talks about the AIDS epidemic and Obama's narcissistic mindset aims to change the truth into a lie, and the lie into the truth. It's known that AIDS is caused largely by gays having sex, and originally was named GRIDS, for gay-related immune deficiency syndrome. But now they've changed the name to AIDS instead. I don't have time to read this wonderful article, but I'm going to print it in full in the September-October prophecy flash. But it's interesting that Jude, the book of Jude, verses 4, 7, and 8, tells us that there are certain men crept in unawares, who were before of old ordained to this condemnation, ungodly men, turning the grace of our God into lasciviousness, denying the only Lord God and our Lord Jesus Christ. Even as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities about them in like manner, giving themselves over to fornication and going after strange flesh, are set forth as an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. Likewise also these filthy dreamers defile the flesh, despise dominion, and speak evil of dignities. Theodore Roosevelt said, "I believe that the next half-century will determine if we will advance the cause of Christian civilization or revert to the horrors of brutal paganism. The thoughts of modern industry in the hands of Christian charity is a dream worth dreaming. The thought of industry in the hands of paganism is a nightmare beyond imagining. The choice between the two is up to us." So said Theodore Roosevelt. Brethren, let's choose God's way and wholeheartedly pursue God's way, because it is the way of life, eternal and everlasting. Praise the Lord.
Praise the Lord.